Welcome back, adventurers, to another episode of the Corner of Story and Game. Today we return to exploring the art of game design, looking at 4 more lenses from the textbook. Joining us is Zachary Roush, a seasoned writer with nearly a decade of experience spanning various industries. Zach's adventurous spirit and creativity has propelled him across the globe to pursue his passion for storytelling. Currently honing his skills in narrative design, Zach is a proud alum of the narrative department and a valued member of Small Nose Studios. So, join me in extending a welcome to Zach as we explore the 4 more lenses and unravel their impact on crafting immersive narratives. Zach, thank you for joining me.
Hey man, it's great to be here.
So we're here today to chat about 4 more of the lenses from the art of game design, and I'm just going to pull up my little list here. We're going to do the lens of infinite inspiration, the lens of problem statement, the lens of character function, and the lens of character traits, because those two actually kind of go together. But before we dig into the lenses, I do like to start out with a little bit of a grounding, find out who you are and where you came from. So A, how did you fall in love with gaming? B, what was kind of your journey to get to where you are today? And C, what are you up to these days?
Okay, so I actually have a funny story for this question. As a kid, I struggled with getting into stories in general because I had a hard time reading. So I didn't read chapter books till 2nd grade when my parents tried everything and they finally got me into them. But once I started playing video games, it was, that format kind of took a second fiddle. And that happened because I used to spend my summers in Indiana with my cousin and uncle. And one summer I went over there and they had this game called Ratchet and Clank, one of the best platformers of the modern age, I think. Yeah. And I played it and I raved about it. And even I got my dad to try it out and he loved it too. And so one day, a PlayStation 2 showed up in the house with Ratchet and Clank on it. And I was just so enamored with it and played it all the time. And my parents hated it. But a couple of things about it, it ended up in the house. And my dad, instead of saying that it was ours, he said that he bought it and it was going to go eventually towards an orphanage so that I wouldn't get too attached to it for some reason, or as a practical joke. So every day I'd play as much as I can because this PlayStation was going away to the orphanage at some point. Yeah. And I also had to play as much as I can because he didn't buy a memory card for it. So every time that the PlayStation got turned off, I'd have to start the whole game over. So I got pretty good at those beginning levels for the longest time until eventually he pulls the wool from over my eyes and it's not going to an orphanage. And we finally have a memory card so I can actually beat the game. And that's been a running joke all this time. Christmas is oh, Zach, this might be going to an orphanage. Okay, don't get too attached to it. But it kind of really started the love affair. Is just a summer of Ratchet and Clank with my cousin and uncle. And I've always loved words and I've loved books and movies, but video games are really the full package. You're playing with the character, you're in the story. It's words, if there's lore documents, it's words that you can dive into, and it's everything else too. It's how could you not be obsessed with it? Yeah. So, and the rest of the story is kind of like a lot of other stories. Just keep using words as a medium, keep writing short stories and other things, hoping and dreaming to make it into a career, getting a degree in creative writing at college, trying to get into the games industry without knowing what I'm doing, letting that dream die because it's impossible without knowing what you're doing, and then coming back to it. It's almost 8 years later that I've really come back to this idea my writing is good enough for a lot of different mediums. I've been working mostly in fiction and short stories, but there's no strict definition on what words can do, which is why they're the best thing ever. So hence the last fall when you and I were taking the course together, just sort of, I don't know, I kind of see this more a philosophical note, but in life, nothing is wasted. None of our experiences are wasted, and things come back in our lives as opportunities. not necessarily for a reason, but they come back into our lives, and whether that's hopes and dreams or opportunities, and it's kind of up to us to take them when they come back to us. And that's what the course meant to me. It was just sort of like this thing that was coming back around like a boomerang.
Right on.
Yeah.
To give a bit of a frame, the short stories that you've been working on, where do people find those? What are those for? And then you also have a book, right?
I do. Yeah. Can't forget about that. So my short stories are only right now on my short story newsletter on Substack called Realms. ZacharyRoush.substack.com is where you find those. And they're sci-fi and fantasy short stories. I do a reading of them, so it's like a podcast as well. And then I also do some sci-fi and fantasy reviews of, everything, video games, movies, etc. And I do have a book out this year. It's been like a 6-year process of writing and editing and revising, and I finally committed to putting out into the world. And that book is Cursed Creatures. And it's a sort of like, the best way to describe it is, if you know Redwall, the book series written by some old British guy, basically a fantasy where all the characters are animals running around with swords and stuff. My book, Cursed Creatures, is like that, the spiritual successor, a bit more modern, with a lot more magic and high stakes, and a found family sibling quest.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. And to bring us up to date, you are now helping out over at Small Lone Studios. When did you join the team there?
I joined, I think, at the beginning of this month. I just finished my first actual game jam, and with a couple other people from T&D, and we made a game called The Film for Seed Comp. And I was hungry for more. I felt really confident in what I learned there, and that I wanted to take it to the next level. And then I saw that Small Lone Studio still needed some help with their new project. So I got on there as a writer, and I'm primarily writing one of our most beloved characters, Urshunabi, the god of not the underworld. He's sort of like the Sumerian version of Chiron from Greek myth, ferrying souls to the underworld. Yeah. So he's not just like some god, like weird god character. He's like this smarmy train conductor, and everyone's obsessed with him.
I cannot wait to see that game. That's going to be so cool.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome.
All right, let's dig into the lenses, shall we? So the first one up is we're going to attack the lens of infinite inspiration. So this one, it encourages designers to kind of draw from a wide range of sources for creative fuel. So let's start kind of broad here. How do you personally cultivate and harness that infinite inspiration that we talk about when you put it into your narrative design? And can you think of any specific examples of this where something unexpected or inspires you?
So this really makes me think about Ryan Holiday. I listened to him on a podcast one time, and he said that the most important thing is for writers and creatives is to live an interesting life. And I really believe that's sort of the source of all inspiration. If you don't live an interesting life, then like you're never going to see patterns and make connections that you need to really have inspiration. Mm-hmm. And that's something I don't outwardly express all the time, but I think inspiration comes from patterns and connections that we make whenever we go on an adventure, whenever we meet a stranger, or when we live a lot of life. There's coming from a more like wanting to be published background. There seems to be a lot of writers out there writing in a vacuum, and they are, they might live at home. They might be just living very focused lives on their work and other tasks, but they're not always expanding their horizons or challenging themselves. And I can't speak for everyone's work, but I can say that the most successful writers are out there living life and doing really interesting things that are not in a routine or in a pattern.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Something you're right. It's important to be living and out there taking in all these experiences, but an interesting exercise is also to go back and think about the things you did as a kid that were just pure fun or pure emotion, running in the woods, pretending to be a knight, and then drawing inspiration from things that are like primordial. Do you do that at all? Do you ever reach back and grab stuff from when you were little?
If you're asking me if I run around naked in the wilderness, I don't do that.
I'm not
anymore.
It didn't catch me, so it didn't happen.
Exactly. Outlaw logic. Doesn't matter if you don't get caught.
That's right.
I really resonated with you're talking about, like the primordial emotional state. So like emotions are such a big source of inspiration for me, and it most often happens randomly that I'll get these insights and it'll be like a phrase that inspires an emotional inspiration. And I most often, I don't know, for me, it doesn't work where if I'm having a highly emotional experience that inspires me to write something, they're kind of separate. So going to the other thing I just said, like sometimes I'll be watching a show and a phrase will really stand out to me, and that will encapsulate something I've felt or a pattern I've recognized. Like I was watching Gilmore Girls of all things recently, and Lorelai Gilmore says something like, we just live brief, bright lives and then it's over. And that phrase just really encapsulated something very beautiful and powerful to me. It's like, life can be very short and very brief. And that's like, why we have to make the most of it. So that's, a lot of other media serves as an inspiration for me. And that's, I don't know, that's just something that really works for me, is reflecting on my favorite shows and movies and such.
Very cool. You're a traveler. You've lived in a lot of different places and far-flung places. I'm curious, do you draw inspiration from the cultures and the people and the places? And if so, how do you use that to keep things more authentic, I guess, because you're having experiences that lots of people don't get to have?
Yeah, that's really true. I feel like when you travel, or when people travel in general, they try to lose themselves in the travel and the experience. For me, I try to bring everything that I am to it when I travel so that I can kind of compare notes, see what rubs against me, causes friction, see what really rings true. So yeah, recently, as you know, I was living in Vietnam and we lived there for 1.5 years, and I got to travel a lot for a job. And a lot of things would randomly inspire me, like I should really use that for my writing. And some of it was just the environment, the jungle, the heavy humidity, the bugs everywhere, and butterflies. Vietnam is amazing butterflies of all things. But the thing that was really, that I really hungered for was understanding. And Vietnam is such a different place from the social structures to the family units to how men and women relate. And it was such a strong contrast to what I think like America tries to be and what I want America to be. And it was so interesting to see how different things were, and even to challenge my pride a little bit. Being American comes with a lot of innate sort of pride. Every country, every person probably has that if they care about their country at all. But like for me, coming from this place with all these resources, all this wealth, to a country that is still very much developing, is still working on like infrastructure to trash collection to a lot of different things. Like there's something extremely special there, and family connections and how people care for one another that is missing in the United States. And that's just one of many things I noticed. And I don't know, like a lot of the Westerners there that I talked with and got to know, the ones that live there anyway, they always remarked how amazing it was that, the Vietnamese could do so much with so little. And I know most of the Westerners come from really developed countries, first world countries, but we have, in a lot of ways, a lot less than some Vietnamese people. And it's that contrast, that friction is where the passion lies for me. Like, can I capture that in my words? Can I capture that in a world? And, whether it's a player or a reader, can I challenge them the way I was challenged? Can I give them something new that they couldn't find anywhere else?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's, traveling is, part of living an interesting life. That's one of the easiest ways for everyone to get some experience.
Yep. That's why Anthony Bourdain is one of my heroes.
Man, R.I.P.
Yeah.
I love that man.
From a craft, like a technical point of view, just to put a point on this, how do you capture? You're out there exploring the world, or even at home in your backyard, and something hits you. You see a cool flower, and it's like, oh, I have this whole idea for, Grounded, the video game, part 2. But from a technical point of view, do you have a notebook that you keep in your back pocket? Or are you the kind of guy who has to journal 3 pages every morning? Or like, what's your process?
I keep it super, super simple. Something strikes me, I pull out my phone and type it in a note. I don't know. I have a weird thing about paper. My hands, this might be TMI. My hands are a little sweaty always. So paper just doesn't work for me. So I always type it in notes, and, Apple Notes, it syncs with the computer. So I type it there and boom, it's on my computer, and I can use that in my writing. And then my favorite thing in the past year is this. Mm-hmm. You can see it's a Kindle Scribe. So it's like a Kindle you can write on and stuff. There's a lot of other note-taking tablets like it, but you can also use it to read and take all your notes and write it down. The pen feels great. So don't have this sweaty palm problem,
There you go. I would get one of those, but then I'd have to get rid of all these, and I'm not doing that. So
yeah.
Nope. Very cool.
Yeah.
Dragon Dictate's fun too. If you're into voice to text, like voice to text apps are really cool too. I use them when I have an idea. Good way to capture them.
I've heard a lot of good things about Dragon.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's move on to the next lens then, now that we've talked about inspiration. So next is the problem statement. So this is the lens, this is the lens that focuses on identifying and defining the core challenges or the problems maybe that need to be addressed within the design of a game. So that could be narrative design, mechanical design, but for today we're talking about narrative, obviously. So in your experience, in your mind, how do you define the problem statement in a narrative design type of project? And then how does that process shape the direction of the scope early in that ideation phase when you're planning out your project?
I mean, the question of creative freedom is it's always an interesting one. I think I used to believe that pure freedom is the purest form of art, but I don't think that's the case. I don't really believe in that anymore. And I think that just comes from realizing that endless creative freedom means too many options. And with a narrative, solving or creating a problem statement and then solving it, it's important to have really good frameworks and some standard things. And since I'm pretty new to the narrative design thing, I only have theories that I'm developing right now. So, don't take my word for it for the rest of my life.
Right.
So yeah, talking about constraints and frameworks, I try to go back in my head always to the story stack that we learned in class, starting out with the player fantasy, what kind of game it is, action, how are players going to interact with the world or people, economy, are players going to advance, what's happening to the world itself, then the world, where is the story taking place, what's going on with it, and then the story itself, what is the character, what is the player character, what is the player doing with this world. And so that story stack is so simple and so beautiful, and it's really helped me in this early sort of like this period where I'm still figuring things out. And besides like a constraint like that, another limitation is a helpful limitation, I would say, is genre and genre conventions. Because then if you look at what you're making and you can find something similar, then you have a lot more material to work with. like pure creative freedom, creating something from nothing, I feel like that's sort of a lie. So it's always better to steal. It helps you make work a lot faster, makes working a lot more efficient. And it gives you a lot more narrative tools too that other people will already recognize. Mm-hmm. And so like you take all that and you hone it in to create your game. Like with this game jam from last month, the film, the game's called The Film. The concept came from somebody else. The game jam we did was called Seed Comp. It's a 2-round thing. The first round, people submit random ideas. And the second round, game devs come together and make a game from those ideas. So the ideas we took were like friends watching a movie and nuns with guns. So we sort of had this idea of like, okay, this is about friends watching a movie and it's related to B movies. So then from there, we spun out the story of this friend group who came together because they fell in love with movies, and in particular this one B movie called Narcissus. And the idea was like this friend group had a lot of challenges, and then one of the friends dies, and sort of the spirit of that friend kind of takes over the film that brought them together, and that's kind of how the story starts. So already from the idea that someone else gave, and doing some, just thinking about genre conventions, like a group of friends and movies, what goes together more perfectly, a horror sort of genre. And what you need for horror, you need some sort of supernatural thing. A friend dies and there's a haunting. And what does that haunting do? Like you can chain these things together, and it doesn't always feel like logical, but it feels very inspirational. And it feels very natural too. Mm-hmm. So like my theory with that is it's important for every creative discipline, especially with a game, to work with some constraints so that you're not dealing with the tyranny of choice, you're not overwhelmed, and so that you can really lean on conventions. But like you also can't lean on them too hard. You have to put a fresh spin on everything. Otherwise, like you're just being derivative,
Excellent point.
Mm-hmm. Did that answer your question?
Oh, it certainly does. Oh, you nailed it right on the head. But yeah, you're 100% right. Like constraints in a creative process, like I went to art school for like graphic design and sculpture and stuff. The constraints of the medium are what makes it special. And it's quite often what will fire creativity, whether the constraint is a deadline or a word count, or you have to work with a certain type of marble, or you're working with old clay as opposed to new clay. Like the constraint informs what ends up coming out of it. So that's completely applicable to narrative design as well, I'm sure.
Yeah. And, besides constraint, like the way that you can be ready, like I feel you have to be sort of ready for whatever problem that your creative thing that you're making is presenting you. And the only way to be ready is to sort of like work with a lot of different mediums. Like you as an artist, if you're not working with marble and clay and paints, then you won't be able to make connections between those things to make something new. Yeah. Side note.
We learn new things every time we dabble in a different art. That's why musicians who paint are better musicians, and painters who also write poetry and are also better painters. Like it's the more we dabble with everything else. And I think we're driven, like, to tie back into that inspiration idea. I think as a creative person, you can't help but want to try other things. Like you start narrative design and suddenly you're like, what, that Unreal looks fun. I want to try and, build a landscape, or I'm going to build a house inside of Unreal. And you learn that, and it's like, oh, hey, I can make cinematography in here. Maybe I'm going to light a person's face and just do a monologue or something just to learn that. And then I'm going to write the background music for it. And before you know it, you're way down that rabbit hole.
Then you're winning an Oscar.
Yeah, right. Well, I think that nails the whole problem statement thing, I guess. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, we're good about that. All right. So
I think I do want to add like one thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to sound preachy, but I think every creative person should try to be a Renaissance person, like they should try to do a lot of different things. And I say that because I can tend to be a fearful person that doesn't want to try new things. And it's really only when I jump over that little hurdle that, my horizons expand and new ideas emerge. And, if I don't know, a couple of years ago, I was really locked in fear. I had a really bad marketing job experience and a boss that taught me a lot of great things, but was pretty horrendous in other ways. And so it took me a while to step out of that fear. But once I did, it really challenged my worldview, and really, like, my art level went through the roof, my ability and capacity and new ideas. But I mean, despite the horrible experience I had, I still had to step out of that fearful place. And, I just hope that other people can feel enabled to do that too. Yeah. I want to help them do that somehow. So hopefully this helps.
There you go. Tell them, show the way, make something cool that inspires. You're working on it, man.
Yeah.
All right, let's pull it back to the lenses here for a second. We're going to talk about the last two, character function and character traits, because they kind of go together, but let's attack character function first. So this particular lens, it tells you to consider how each character contributes to the overall experience in a game or whatever it is, from things like advancing the plot to providing gameplay mechanics and emotional engagement, all that kind of like, what is the character's function? So in your work, your experience, and we're talking games, or we can be talking prose or fiction here or whatever, how do you approach defining the function of a character?
I really like to just start writing a character. I just like to jump in, and I do have to backtrack. I dive into a character, I dive into the writing, and then I tend to go back and do some backfilling and try to mine out what else is going on with this character. And that's mostly just because I'm excited to start whatever new thing it is. But what I've found recently that I really am latching on to is this sense of an emotional heart to my characters. And this is sort of a new thing for me. And I think it comes from the game design thinking, like we talked about in the class, how every character needs to go on a journey, and every character needs to want something. Every character needs to have a sense of lack or a wound. And I've definitely used the idea of a wound in characters for a long time. And what that wound means to the character, how they talk, what they want, and how they get motivated. But really, I'm moving more towards, like, every character needs to have an emotional heart to them and the capacity for an emotional journey. Because not every, reflecting on real life, not everyone has just a gaping wound that they're dealing with. Like, sure. Some people are just well-adjusted and normal, and a range of people and a range of characters on different emotional states is much more interesting and more realistic, right? Because that creates a lot of friction. If every one of them is an Eeyore and they're all depressed and sad, then like nothing will really change. So going back to the question, I'm trying to be more diligent about giving each character sort of continuum of where their emotions are and what they want and what they need. Like with creating the film, there were other writers and I created character bios that really served as the grounding framework for how they sounded, what they talked, how they talked to each other, because we all kind of change our voice a little differently. And the characters do need to serve a purpose, like you said. So like their purpose will be defined by what they need from their emotional journey. But that being said, like something that I think is missing from a lot of video games and media in general is a sense of voice. And I mean, that might be tied to a later question, but like the wound or the lack or their emotional journey should determine how they sound, and they should sound really unique as possible. And I just feel like there needs to be more uniqueness in mediums in general. But
and you're right, that does pull into the next part, the part about traits. So
yeah,
I'm curious. So just to riff off on the side for a second, you have a strong background in short story writing. So I've also studied the short form fiction stuff, and basically a short story is a boiled down to essence of a single event or a single flashpoint in a story. So when you're bringing characters into a short story, every character has to serve there has to be a purpose for that character. It's not like a novel where you can bring in characters and have a background course and have filler characters just to be a foil. Every character in a short story has to serve a purpose, or they shouldn't be there. So how do you, when you're writing your short stories, how do you determine the purpose of a character? Do you work the other way? I have to do this thing and then craft a character to do that? Like, what's your process there?
It's definitely not. I am much more a go with the flow short story writer, and I do have to work back and revise a lot. It takes me a few drafts to decide what I want from the story and how the characters can serve that want. But I try to start with a very natural state. When characters and the narrator are often very on the nose, just saying what they want, just saying very blatant things. And sort of, the best short stories aren't always on the nose. They leave a lot to be interpreted and a lot of layers to uncover, or even some fake layers that are just nice little icing on the cake. So a lot of my work is to just finish a story and let it be in its natural state. And then my revision process is what really refines it into what it's supposed to be, whether that's, changing dialogue to be a little bit more obscure, changing the narration style, changing the, short stories. The tense matters too. So past, present, whatever tense, the POV. And so as far as I have a very loose process and try to finish the thing and go back and either add layers or remove them as I see fit,
I've interviewed quite a number of fiction writers, and one of the questions I used to ask a lot was, are you a pantser or are you a plotter? You're obviously a pantser, and it's quite often it comes out that as a pantser, that first draft is what some of us call an outline, and then you build it, rewrite, and that becomes your finished product. So the process is it's not unique, and it works. Like personally, I'm a little more planner than a plotter, but that's cool. That's very cool. And your stories are great. So obviously it works. So.
Yeah. And that's funny too. I feel like every plotter has a bit of pantser in them and vice versa. So I'll get scenes in my head or something very concrete, and then I'll write to that. That'll be like my goalpost. And then everything around it will be it'll feel more just pure inspiration, but that it's always good for me to have a goal point to reach to.
Completely wandering off topic for 5 seconds here, but have you ever had one of those moments where you wake up in the middle of the night, you grab a pen and a piece of paper and you write something down and it's perfect? Like it's like, you have to go back and give it a polish, but it's like, and you're up for the rest of the night with goosebumps. And it's like, oh my God, where the hell did that come from? You ever had that? No? Am I crazy? Maybe it was
I honestly, I can remember waking up and writing down 1 or 2 lines, but no, when I'm asleep, I'm asleep. I wish I was like my inspirations woke me up. Now I was even for this podcast, I had a brilliant idea and then I didn't write it down fast enough.
Oh no.
So it's gone.
It's out there. There's somewhere.
It's out there. Maybe it's in your head now.
Somebody's going to receive it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, like you were mentioning, character traits is the other side of this particular topic because it delves into the character traits, the personalities, motivations, quirks that define the character when you're fleshing it out in your narrative design. So you've got the function for the character. Now you got to tie those traits, personality, all those things to it. So for you, when you're working, what are your techniques? What are your tools for imbuing characters with depth and personality?
The most important thing for me is to give characters power and agency, or give them a lack of it that they can strive for. My least favorite thing in stories is a character that has no agency or even a sense of dignity. I think there's a lack of writing that gives characters the ability to change, or their story is about them figuring out what they want, which is also kind of boring. But giving characters the power to change what they want just saves a lot of writing time, because then if they know a little bit more what they want, then they can get right to the action. That's more interesting for readers and players. So yeah, focus on power and agency. Besides power and agency, characters, like I said before, characters need an emotional heart, a place that they can start from and then end on. When we took the course, we learned a lot about how, like, not every game is going to have characters that change. But I don't know. I think that's something that feels unchangeable in my philosophy, is that every character should be given the chance to change. And whether they do or not in the story, that depends on a lot of things out of our control. And besides considering like how the character changes, it's how the player's perspective on the character changes too. Like, I remember one of our classes, and I think I put forward this idea that the player changes with the character, and that I think that theory was kind of like shut down a little bit, and that rubbed me the wrong way. And I think it's gotten me to think a lot about whether or not, like, when we're playing games, we change with a character or not. And I think in a small way we do. As we play a game and consume a story, we receive a lot of information from the plot points, from playing the game itself, as we progress with stats and abilities, as we learn more about why a character started the story the way they did, what they lost, what they're learning. We are changing in a very subtle way, but I will admit that, like, I don't know if players actually change. And I don't think players are always deeply thinking about the change, but it's up to us writers to sort of seed the ground for all this to happen. Like, if we want to create a space for ourselves in the game industry, and that's a really big challenge right now. Like, I've never even been in the industry, and people we know are like losing their jobs and they can't get more jobs. Like, it makes me wonder, how can we make ourselves more invaluable to the game industry and to games? And I think we just have to be able to take our storytelling to another level to make it even more impactful. And, I think that means challenging some norms. Like, if these AAA studios can't keep us because the games aren't like emotive enough or whatever, then, like, we need to invent a new format that is a home for us and that can provide for us. Like, we shouldn't have to do things the same way.
Well, there's going to be a lot of exciting things that are going to happen in the industry, I'm sure, over the next while.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, like, despite all the bad news and the layoffs and stuff, that just gives more people more opportunities to do things differently, to make change. Like, we could give into the scarcity mindset that is just going to get worse and worse, or we could think, like, there's a new model out there that needs inventing, and we're going to do it. And it's not going to be me, but it could be you.
Well, no. I honestly think what Small Lone Studios is doing could be part of the answer, is that indie, scrappy startups who are just like, we don't care about money to start. Let's just make something cool that's an experience and that's fun, and do it again and again and again, and we'll all get better. And eventually something's going to come out of that. So
I think that wholeheartedly agree. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Not every game's got to be a big $100 million spectacle. Like, a clever, simple game that is just emotive and tells a good story and takes you for a ride, and it's only 8 hours long, like reading a nice little book, like a little novella. Boom, there you go. Like, that's the way to go.
Yeah, and it only costs you like $5 or something.
Yep.
Boom,
there you go.
Whatever. Yeah.
But the topic of character traits for a second here, just to pull back. I'm in the same camp as you that major characters, like in fiction, should go on a journey. They should progress in some way. They should either rise or fall. They should learn something. They should either get or not get what they need. Like there's the whole hero's journey and all the other narrative structures that can explain that. But in games, there is that avatar character, the main character, you're maybe protagonist or not, but the character that the player is with. That character sometimes changes, sometimes doesn't. But for like, as a game writer, you also have to be aware of all the background characters, all those two-dimensional static characters that come in, have a purpose of giving you a quest or something, and then fade into the background. We have to be aware of those ones who do not. You could create arcs for all of them, but that's a lot of work that's not going to be used. So why? Like, so there is a place for that. I think in class, when they started talking about how some characters don't change, I think that's the characters they were talking about, but I mean, I could be wrong too, but I think maybe I just decided, hey, in my head, I'm like, I believe all main characters have to change, and I'm just going to assign that to the background characters. And that's how I came to terms with it. Because I'm on the same page. A major character needs to undergo some sort of arc, or it's not a story. Like,
yes. Yeah. Yeah. I can agree with that. The full cast of characters that can reflect and be those foils. Yeah, that is definitely important. And I still always hold in my heart a little bit of room for them to change a little bit.
I think that's beautiful, but I think if you're writing a World of Warcraft MMO and you have thousands of quest givers and farmers, and I think some of those characters, they may not have arcs. They may just chop down the tree.
Challenge accepted.
So the orc chopping down the tree going, walk, walk. I want to know what his story. What's his story? Why is he there?
He is going to become a tree activist.
The orc becomes a tree hugger. I love it.
Yes. Yeah.
I want you to write that. I want to read that. Where does work end up? All right. Okay. Well, I think that's going to put a pin in the lenses because we're running close to the end of time. But there is a question that I ask everybody that comes on the show, the question that lives at the heart of the social experiment that I call a podcast. That question is, in my opinion, there is a magical space where stories and games and fiction and short stories and playwrights and actors and everybody can just hang out, get along. In your opinion, what is the magical thread that holds us all together?
I think, this is such a good question. It fills my philosopher heart with a lot of joy to try and answer that question. My old answer for this would be that all art forms and forms of story are just for escaping the horrors and change of this world. But there's something that one of my favorite writers, N.K. Jemisin, said in her short introduction to a book of short stories. At least I think it was her. She said that all novels or all writing is a form of, it's not a form, it's an interaction and it's an evolution. And so I think the thing that holds all art together is that we are interacting with it and it is changing us, and we interact with other people that changes them. And so it's not just like a one-way thing either. Like something we read or someone we talk to can cause us to react to them, and we create something new from that, or we create a new book that causes someone to react to it. It's sort of like this web of creativity that really holds humanity together. Like, I'm really passionate about protecting very human forms of communication, face to face, and interacting with art and poetry and creating spaces for that. Those things are so important for us as people, just to be challenged and to live interesting lives. These sort of experiences that are dead end, like reading a book and not talking about it, is not enough for me anymore. Like, I have to read a book and I have to write about it, or I have to interact with the medium and write about it for my newsletter. And that's something that I feel like a lot of people I talk with are out of practice of is digesting what they're reading and consuming and playing. And that's what social media enables us to do too, not to make it the boogeyman, but we can go and consume things and they're just for ourselves and we can like something or comment, but it just sort of ends there. The discussion ends there. There's no life at some point at the end of that sort of inspiration, but things that inspire new inspiration. I think that's the purpose of our art forms, is to create interactivity, create interconnectedness, and to teach each other how to live and to love and all sorts of things. It's my sort of like big philosophy. Could make a religion out of it. Could get people to buy this religion and build temples and stuff. Like, I wonder if that model exists anywhere else.
Hang out and watch movies and play games and talk about it.
Yeah.
I'm there. Sign me up.
All right.
I'll be your high priest.
I'll give you a nice velvet robe.
Ooh. Can it?
Yes.
All right. That's a good answer, man. I like that. That's good. All right. Well, we're going to start heading towards the door, but first I like to do a little quick fire just so people get to know you a little better and just share what you're up to. So first of all, what are you playing right now?
I'm playing Zachary Roush Shadow Die Twice, or trying to.
That is the right answer. What are you currently reading?
I'm reading Children of Ruin by Adrian Tchaikovsky and also Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert.
Oh, that's a good one. Very nice.
Fantastic.
What is the best advice you've ever received? And this could be life advice or career advice.
Nothing is wasted.
Perfect. All right. Last one. If you could host a game session with any 4 people, living or dead, from any time in history, who would they be and what would you play? And this could be a video game. You could play Ratchet and Clank.
Okay. So my 4 people are Ursula K. Le Guin, Matthew McConaughey, N.K. Jemisin, and Joe Abercrombie. And we would play, I think we would play Back 4 Blood.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very cool.
That'd be a simple zombie game, laughing at each other.
Matthew McConaughey. That'd be fun. All right. Well, man, we're going to start heading towards the door. Before we go, though, I'd like to just give you a second to boost anything that you're working on. So we mentioned Small Own Studios that are working on the Ouroboros Express. I know I said that wrong, but I don't care. You got your book? Creatures. Oh, help me out. Your book?
Here's Creatures.
Thank you. But we have not, we mentioned it, but we haven't pointed a light at it. You've got a newsletter. So where do people find the newsletter?
For monthly short stories and reviews right in your inbox, go to zacharyroush.substack.com. My Substack is called Realms. Nice. And it's free.
There you go. Is there anything I missed that you're working on or that's cool or that you got out there in the world?
No, that's the best stuff right there.
Okay, well, before I turn down the fire and kick you out the door, I'm going to give you the last word. So you got a parting word of wisdom before we cut the mics?
Parting word of wisdom. Persist in your convictions of self-expression. Your art is needed, and your heart can save the world.
Well, the horrors in the walls are starting to move again, so it's probably time to get you out of here. But before I turn down the fire and put up the chairs, I want to say thank you to Zach for sitting down and sharing his insights and wisdom as we explored 4 more lenses from the art of game design. And to you, dear listener, thank you for taking the time to sit down and join us. Until we meet again, remember, keep exploring, creating, and sharing your stories with the world. Stay safe, Wanderer. Your chair will be ready by the fire the next time you stop in the corner of Story and Game.